Hello and welcome to PriceTarget Research. I'm John Lafferty. Our research briefs are short discussions of investment and research topics, including our current rating on stocks of interest, key analytical questions and techniques, and important alerts and events. So let's get started. In this research brief, we're going to be focusing on how to use PriceTarget Research reports, specifically the organization and content of the reports. PTR reports focus on a company's company and stock's current investment attractiveness. They provide a large amount of fundamental analysis key to the drivers of value, and they provide a current estimate of the stock's warranted market value. In other words, its target price. How much higher or lower from the current price is the stock likely to move? The first component in the reports is the basic description of the company's business and operations. The lines of business, some of the noteworthy things that describe the company. In Apple's case, obviously, most people are very familiar with what they do. Next is identification of the peer group based on common lines of business. This is an important tool for the benchmarking sections of the report where a company's performance is measured relative to its peers. Next is a discussion of the current investment rating or value trend rating for the stock. In this example, Apple is rated A. This is a basic measure of current attractiveness. It's generated by two components. The appreciation score, which here is 63, that measures the relative potential appreciation from the current price to the price target relative to the universe. So Apple's positioned to return appreciation better than 63% of the universe. And the power rating, which is a measure of timeliness, that looks at things like price behavior, estimate behavior, industry power. And in this case, the timeliness of a purchase of Apple is 89, meaning it's more attractive than 89% of the universe. Those two factors generate the overall rating of A. And this chart shows the behavior of the appreciation score, the power rating, and the value trend rating over time arrayed relative to the stock price. You can see that Apple became an A-rated stock in June of 2017. The investment profile measures a company's stock's current investment personality. You can see here there are 13 characteristics which taken together do measure Apple's investment personality. What is plotted is the position for each characteristic of the company relative to the S&P 500. And with these characteristics, it's possible then to deduce which sort of investor is likely to be interested in a particular company. It helps match investment objectives with the company's characteristics. We also look at current signals and alerts, investment and operational signals. Here you can see return on equity falling, asset utilization is falling, technical position, on the other hand, very strong. So these are things that take current results, very current results, into account. One of the key measures of performance for a company is cash flow, and in particular how cash flow is used for a year. In 2017, Apple generated over $70 billion of cash flow. You can see non-operating cash contributed an additional $5 billion. Taxes took $10 billion. The reinvestment in the business was $42 billion. In debt, investors contributed $26 billion. The company sold new debt. Equity investors withdrew almost $43 billion from the business, leaving the cash balance to change by $7 billion. Profitability, these are key components of profitability, Apple's operating history. They are components that lead to the return on equity in the lower right. The red dots are Apple's performance each year. You can see with the trend lines what the general trend line has been. And then that performance is benchmarked relative to the peer group. The top end of the bar is the upper quartile for the peer group. The bottom end of the bar is the lower quartile. The line in the middle is the median, and Apple's performance is in red. So you can see that Apple has had outstanding pre-tax margin, return on assets, and return on equity relative to the peer group. Growth is another important measure of performance. Here we're looking at four measures of growth: revenue, earnings, assets, and equity, all on a per share basis, which helps us adjust for acquisitions and share repurchase. And we look both at the long-term trend and also if there are indications that that trend is changing in the short run. You'll notice also to the right, PTR's growth forecast is shown relative to the consensus. They're about the same, and both of them call for a pretty significant decline in revenue in growth relative to where that growth rate has been historically. In addition to the operating history on growth, there's also again a benchmark section which compares Apple's historical growth on those four measures relative to the peer group. Again, the upper end of the bar is upper quartile, lower end is lower quartile, the line in the middle is median performance for the peer group. And as you can see here again, the consensus growth rate for Apple is quite low relative to the peer group. Price history looks at major stock price moves over the historical period, in this case 10 years. The blue bars show pretty much uninterrupted advances or declines. You can see a hallmark for Apple was the run from about $12 at the end of 2008 up to about $90 by the end of 2012. Interestingly, since the early period in 2015, the stock price performance has been relative to the market has been relatively flat. Total returns measure price appreciation plus dividends. Here the performance of Apple with the red dot is compared both to the S&P and the base peer group. Apple's performance, as you can see on trailing 5-year total return basis, was outstanding through the end of 2014, after which the relative position has begun to erode. And for the most recent period through November, you can see that Apple's 5-year total returns relative to both the S&P and the peer group are about at the median. Valuation benchmarks, these are several common measures of valuation. Enterprise value is the total value of the company, debt and equity, and it's compared both to revenue and EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. The price earnings multiple, enterprise value relative to assets, and finally price to equity. The most common or typically used measure, price to earnings, shows that Apple is quite low relative to both groups. Interestingly, several of the other measures show just the opposite, so that Apple's valuation can be something of a puzzle to people. And that's one of the reasons then that we look at price targets. The blue band here connects the red dots, which are PriceTarget Research's estimate of the warranted value of Apple. At each point in time, you can see that the stock price pretty generally followed the trend set forth by the changes in warranted value. There's been some plateauing, and currently with the stock at around $170, the price target is about $216. So still some appreciation left to enjoy. And finally, the key drivers of valuation, return on equity and forecasted growth rate. Apple's returns on equity of 40% are unusually high by any standard. Its cost of capital, meaning the return required, our PriceTarget Research's estimate of the return required by investors for Apple at 10 gives a large gap of 40 versus 10% gap. Think of Apple as like a 40% coupon bond in a 10% bond market. The more money it invests, the bigger the premium placed on those investments in the marketplace. And the forecasted growth rate is now down to around 6%. People tend to think of Apple as growing very rapidly, but at its size and given some of its historical performance, it is not growing as rapidly or expected to grow as rapidly in the future as it has in the past. So that's a relatively brief look at PriceTarget Research reports, their organization and content, and in particular the value trend rating, which presents the company and stock's current relative attraction relative to the market. Well, that's it for this research brief. Until next time, you can find more of our videos on YouTube/PriceTarget Research, or you can visit us on the web at PriceTargetResearch.com, where you'll find very broad coverage, comprehensive research and ratings, and relentless updates and alerts. See you on the next research brief.